When I removed the bonnet originally, when I was stripping, the area around the hinges was so badly rusted that nothing would unbolt. So I ended up having to use the angle grinder to cut through the hinges and so on. So putting it back together is a bit of a new exercise because I actually didn't pull it apart. It was cut apart. So I have new hinges, I have the bushes that go on the either side of the hinge there. I think they call this a top hat. This goes through the hinge and into the frame there, and I have a new bolt going through there. So what I'm doing at the moment is to make sure everything's clean and there's no imperfections on the surface. So I'm going through and cleaning out the tube there where the top hat slides in. Now it slides in and bottoms out. Seems to catch a little bit, so I may have a little bit of rubbish in the end there, so I'll clean that further. I've been getting in with a fine screwdriver to gently clean the flat bottom there, not going into the threaded piece so I don't damage the thread. But there seem to be a few little bits of rubbish still in there catching, so I'll clean that out. So a bit more work to do on that yet. I haven't run down the thread on the inside. It does thread in, but I want to make sure that's nice and clean as well. Just tightening up a little bit there, so I'll probably run that down with the appropriate tap, clean that out. So it gives me a good starting point. Once that's done, then I'll look about putting these hinges on the lower panel here. I have new shims. I do know how many of the old shims were in place originally. I've got that written down somewhere. But the old shims, of course, have all corroded. But that doesn't really matter because I'm replacing them anyway. So once I've cleaned this all up, put those hinges on there, stack them up with a number of hinges, probably around about the number that came out, and then see if I can push this panel on here and drop the bolts in, these pivot bolts. I'll probably need a hand with that because as I've mentioned, I have a hernia, so picking that up and trying to balance, and it's just not worth the problems it'll cause. So it probably is a two-person job anyway, to make sure you've got everything lined up to put these in so nothing fouls up or cross threads. So anyway, it's started, so a bit more cleaning up. I'll also clean up the face of this, because when the hinge butts up with that, well, actually doesn't butt directly up, it has a small, I don't know what you call it, whether it's a neoprene or plastic, or anyway, looks plastic, piece that will go in between there to provide a smoother running. So I'll make sure that this is clean and doesn't have any burrs on it. Now I don't know how other people have tackled this problem, and that's trying to get this nylon bush into the hinge. I mean, it's a very, I suppose you call it an interference fit, so it's just not going to push in no matter what you do. If you get it slightly out of alignment, it will then start to damage the edge. I'm sure there's a special tool somewhere, but what I've done is use basically what I've got here. One is the new top hat, the new bush. I've used a 3/8 bolt. I was going to use the one that comes with the kit, but it's not long enough, so I've used a longer 3/8 bolt. Put a washer at the back. I've got this socket which actually slides over the top hat itself, because the top hat actually comes through. And to make sure it stays in alignment, because if you just put it in there without anything to make sure it's running parallel to the sides of the hinge, once again you'll get the whole thing tilting and catching. So what I've done in my garage, and probably other people's garages, I've actually got brass shim, and I've cut a couple of pieces of brass shim, slid them into the hole just enough to take up any movement in the top hat when it goes through the hinge itself. And then just checking that it's parallel, the top hat's parallel to the face of the hinge, then I gradually screw the nut on the end here down. And what that's doing, because this wider washes at the back, it's actually pulling the top hat into the hinge. Now I've just started that. It's a bit hard to hold this up to the camera and do it all at the same time. I'll try. But very gently, making sure this doesn't tilt over at all. Still has the ability to tilt a bit because I don't have exactly the right amount of shim to shim that out. So you've got to shim it to the thickness of the nylon bush. And then very gently I start to screw it in. Now it's actually gone in now, it's just gone over the edge of the hinge, and it's winding in. Now what I'll do when I've wound that all the way in, I'll take all this apart. I can actually probably I'll take that piece out and show you the shim. There you can see. You can see how the top hat comes through. You might be able to see the brass shim in there. It's just stopping this from wobbling, and it means that as I push that top hat in, I don't know whether it'll push in with my fingers. Yes, it will a bit. It just pushes the nylon in through the fitting. So what I'll then do is I'll pull that out, reverse it. I won't need the shim because it's got the thickness of the bush, and then I'll just use the bolt again to pull the hinge in place, or not the hinge, pull the bushes in place. So that's another way you can do this. It's certainly a lot easier than trying to figure out how you're going to tap it in and then ruin the bush itself. The other thing that might help is that when I did that particular bush, I've got a bit of emery, and I just made sure there was no sharp edge on the edge of the bush. So just rubbing it around, in effect putting a very slight chamfer on that edge, because I can actually feel it where it's been made. There's actually a proud edge on there. So if you rub that down just on the edge and then do as I've done there, you should get the bushes in place. Now that bush went in nicely, seated home now, so that's fine. Just got to put the other one in using the same process, and this is my bush inserting tool. Socket, thread, bolt, a couple of shims. Now these shims I cut off a large roll I've got. They're about 0.34 of a mil thick each, and what I do, because the gap between the top hat and the hinge itself is much larger than that, I needed two. I double them up, so puts me about 0.6768. Once that's in there, that takes up the slack and keeps the top hat true. I don't need that with the second bush, so all I need with that, push that through, put the bush over the shaft there. Now I've got some lubricant on the bush. It's just normal household Vaseline, and then what I do, put the bolt through. I've got a large washer which fits over the shaft there and sits on top of the bush. Then socket goes over the top of that. Just put a washer on there, makes it easier to turn the nut. Put the nut on. Rubbish on that's all right. Make sure everything looks true, because it's got to go straight in. If it's on an angle, it will catch and make that process far more difficult. Check to make sure it's going in properly. Seems to be true. Okay, there it goes. And that should be hard. Okay, bush is inserted. Now that is a far less painful process, let's get that out, of getting those two bushes in. Any other way I tried, I just couldn't get them to go in without, going off true and then catching, and then if anything damaging the nylon bush. So they're in. So that is a simple process. With the first bush you'll need the shims. With the second bush, because you've already got one of the bushes in, it holds that true, so that solves the problem. Anyway, so that's all in. Very tight. I probably need to put a little bit of lubrication on that. Make it easier to slide those in. So that's it. Simple do-it-yourself tool, providing you've got some shim. I mean, I've got brass shim. Maybe you could use aluminium cans. I don't know what the thickness of those are. So, but anyway, I need to double up the shim because I don't have one thick enough. It's somewhere about 0.6, the gap that you're trying to fill in. I'm about to start the reassembly process on the E Type, on the bonnet, and I've done a lot of research on what's involved in actually aligning the bonnet and fitting it to the bulkhead. The research that I've been able to do mainly focuses on getting it aligned, as in getting it centralised in the vehicle, and then the rest of it is about getting the fit to the bulkhead by the use of shims. Now, the bonnet hinges are shimmed. What that does is give movement between the actual bonnet and the body, so it can move in and out. And there are also other shims like this which lift the front of the bonnet up so it can align with the sill. Now, I've mentioned before, when I pulled the bonnet apart, I actually had to cut the hinges off because the corrosion and rust was so bad in that area. But when I actually cut it off, I noted the number of shims that were in the position behind the hinges. Now on the right hand side, multiple shims, 4, 5, all of different thicknesses. Now I assume these were original shims, came from the factory, maybe they weren't. These are very thin, very corroded now. These are thicker, and these are the ones that I've been able to buy new, that thickness. That's a new one there. These are the ones that actually go behind the hinge and give that movement between the bulkhead and the edge of the bonnet. Now, as I've said, on my car there were 5 or more spaces behind the hinge on the right hand side, and on the left hand side a few very thin ones. So to get that fit to the bulkhead required shifting the bonnet around. Now, as I say, I've done a lot of research on the internet, and the discussion is usually about adding or removing add or removing shims. And in some cases I've seen commentary where all the shims have been removed on one side, and then there's no ability to move that bonnet closer to the bulkhead so you can get the right gap. Then the discussion focuses on either purchasing modified hinges themselves so you can get more more movement towards the bulkhead, or modifying your existing hinges. Now there's only one commentary that I've found that talks about actually looking at the alignment of the engine frames and the bonnet carrier. Now there is general discussion about looking at that, but not identifying how much the alignment is out and how that's affecting the alignment of the bonnet, and also by virtue of that the number of shims you need to put in place. Now I know my vehicle has had front end collisions. Various evidence was found of accident damage to the left hand side of the car and the right hand side of the car in terms of the panels on the outside. But what I've done is I've gone further than that and gone back to the alignment diagram, or the accident alignment diagram in the service manual. Now this is the alignment diagram, or a copy of it. You can see it's been used, it's folded, it's got dirt all over it, because I've been using it to check the alignment of the engine frames. Now, just looking at it from above, this is the bonnet carrier. This bar here is where you put or attach the hinges, and that gives the position or the pivot point for the bonnet. So it pivots on that, up and down. My vehicle, as I said, has been hit lots of different angles, I assume. Some are around or on the panel damage I noted was around this area, and certainly I've had some around this area. Now, this diagram provides a number of key measurements, particularly for the bonnet carrier, and it's on this lower diagram here where you can see that. There's a section here which measures the distance between the picture frame, which is there, and the what I'll call it the pivot point there, the centre of the pivot bolt. Now I've measured, remeasured and so on that distance there, and I've also checked all of this part where the engine frames attach to the picture frame there. There's measurements for that as well. All of that on my car is within a millimetre, so I'm not worried about that. That's quite close. But this measurement here for the bonnet carrier is out. Now, just to exaggerate, the pivot point on this side has been pushed back, and it's about 4.5 millimetres back. On this side it's been pushed forward roughly about 3 millimetres forward. So instead of being straight, it's at an angle. Now what that means, when you put the bonnet on, you have to add lots of spaces on this side and reduce the number of spaces on that side to make allowance for it, to get it back. This is still bent, or bent out of alignment, but the shims are used to cater for that. Now, what I've done is to address that problem first. And I've tried to correct the worst impact of that alignment. As I say, it's roughly a bit over 4 that side, a bit over 3 this side. So I've been careful to try and knock that back into alignment. Now, I haven't used a massive sledgehammer. I've used a 1 pound hammer, so it's decent enough with a block of wood, and I've gently, well, a little bit more than gently, I've tried to knock this back into alignment or close to. Now, by very carefully doing that, remeasuring and so on, I've got this alignment back to within a millimetre of what it should be. And this one here on this side is about 2 millimetres, so it's still a little bit forward, that's still a little bit back, but nowhere near the amount it was. So what I'm hoping when I reassemble, I won't end up with a massive pack of shims on this side. As I say, it was a bit over 1/2 inch, and hardly any on this side, and because of that, having difficulty getting this back to line up with the bulkhead. You need some ability to manoeuvre to get that fine fit. So I'm about to reassemble the bonnet onto the car, onto the pivot there, and see what impact that's had. I'm hoping that I've now made it a lot easier to shim to get that bonnet into proper alignment. I still need to address, of course, whether the rear end of the bonnet is straight, and I know it's not. It's also got a few dings and so on there, so it may not be straight. So I've got to check that. But what I'll do first is look at how it fits generally, whether I can get that back far enough to get a good fit at the bulkhead. So anyway, that's what I've done. It's taken a little bit more time, but I don't want to get to the stage where when I'm trying to actually fit it, I've run out of the ability to do fine adjustments with the shims. Now, as far as the shims are concerned, as I said, the old ones were a combination of the thicker ones, which are about 3.2 millimetres thick. They're all corroded, can't be reused. The thin ones are these, which are even more corroded. They're about 1 to 1.1 millimetres thick. These are the ones I can't source at the moment, the thin ones. I can get the thick ones, so they're not a problem, easy to get those, but I will need the thin ones to get the finer adjustments that might be required. So what I'm going to do is to actually make these. I can get aluminium about 1 millimetre thick. In fact, I've got some scrap around the workshop that's about that size. So I'll set about making a number of these, and I'll use those, as I say, for the fine adjustment. So it shouldn't take too long. They might not be quite as neat as the originals, or as neat as those. It's going to be a little bit difficult to cut these slots out, but I'm sure I can make them good enough to be able to use. I'll set about that, get a little supply of those, so when I'm ready to start shimming the bonnet properly, I'll have the required number of shims to do that.